Hello and welcome to Business Today Television. I'm Siddharth Zarabi and you're watching Easynomics. On the show today, we'll discuss the alphabet soup that seems to exist as far as India's economic recovery is concerned. Some people believe it's a V shape, some others argue that it is W, and many others say it is K-shaped. On the show today, I have Soumya Ghosh, Group Chief Economic Advisor of the State Bank of India, who has done some wonderful research which seems to suggest that the entire conversation around K-shaped is flawed. He, in fact, in my words, that report of SBI Research debunks the issue of a K-shaped recovery. Welcome to the show, Dr. Ghosh. Is it indeed K-shaped or not? I will start with this very basic question.
No, I think, thank you, Siddharth, for having me on the show. No, I think that I have looked at the narrative and the story for the last several years, actually couple of years post-pandemic. I don't think it's a K-shaped recovery. And I think the people are also saying all sorts of alphabet V, K, L. I don't want to get into the alphabet debate, but I strongly believe it's not a K-shaped recovery at all.
Okay, why do you say it is not a K-shaped recovery? Take us through different parts and we'll try and do that one by one of your report and your pretty categorical statement that it is not a K-shaped recovery.
Yes, see, Siddharth, I think I'll go by the discussion in two parts. I think Indian labor market has some characteristics of also being informal in nature, even though there has been an correction in the informality in the last several years thanks to the formalization initiatives of the government. But the recent PLFS survey report also shows that around 40% of the labor force is still informal. So I'm going by the PLFS report. So taking that into account, I think the analysis, if any analysis has to be done on this K-shaped recovery, it has to take into account both the formal and the informal labor force, because the contention of the critics has been particularly on this informal sector. Now, first, let us look into the informal labor force, because that is the point of criticism by many authors and analysts. The first thing which we have done is that I think if we look into one of our work which we have done, I think close to 10% of the population today corners 65% of India's private final consumption expenditure. This is the data which you culled from the World Bank definition of poor. Now, what we did is that we tried to estimate based on the recent initiatives of the government is providing free food, shelter, then medical initiatives to the bottom of the pyramid. We found out that in the last 3 years, because of these efforts, and these things actually are a little bit difficult to measure because you don't have any measure in the public domain. We found out that the share of this top 10%, or maybe a little below that, has actually declined from 65% of the overall consumption to around 60.5, or you can take it as 60%. So that means there has been a 5% decline in consumption, which is 8.2 trillion if you take the overall private final consumption expenditure into account. Now, we did also a deep stick analysis to see that if all these initiatives are continued, say, for the next 4 to 5 years, and the government has clearly said that they're going to continue with the free food initiative for the next 5 years, then we found out in the next 7 years, by 2030, another 16.2 trillion could move from the upper echelons to the bottom echelons. So if this if that number is achieved, by 2030, we'll have a remarkable feature of 50% of the consumption of the country will be contributed by 90% of the population, which was 65% a decade back. So I think a movement of around more than 10% in overall final consumption expenditure from the upper half to the bottom half, even as India expands its overall pie, I think is something which you need to take cognizance and need to take proud of also. Because every time when you do this analysis, yes, we are clearly saying in the report that there is a preponderance of the top 10%, but there is also the fact that this share is declining, and this has also been established by the tax data. So that answers the first part of your question.
No, can I do a follow-up? Hold on, yes. Let me just follow up on the first part, yes. Then we come to the second part. Yes. So what you are saying is that if earlier 10% would account for 65% of yes. consumption, that ratio is now changing, and you believe that by 2030, 60% will account for a vast majority, 90%, which means that the bottom of the pyramid consumption will continue to grow. Is that what you are saying in simple words?
No, this number is going to be 50%. So from 65% of the consumption, which is being contributed by the upper echelons of the pyramid, that number will come down to 50% by 2030. So there will be an incremental gain of 15% to the bottom of the pyramid because of the initiatives of the government.
Okay, that's a good point. Now, a quick follow-up. When you mentioned free food, explain to me, how does the free food feed into this consumption? Is it because household income at the bottom of the pyramid is getting freed for other kind of consumption?
Yes.
Is that the reason?
Exactly. I think what is happening is that because of this free food, and if you can do a lot of calculations on that, I'm not getting into that one, but giving free food to 80 crore of the population, and interestingly, a lot of people say that this is some sort of a distress, which I don't agree into. I think this type of support and handholding is required for those at the bottom of the pyramid, because this is actually a social infrastructure. And if you build up this social infrastructure, the money which is freed from those buying of food in the open market, that money now these people actually could spend other purposes of consumption. And this was clearly shown by one of our earlier research studies, where we found out that people who were getting the Swanidhi loan were actually also spending on items of some sort of a recreation, some sort of medical, some sort of buying from the e-stores and other things like that. So my point is that if you give free of resources for the poor people, they will use it judiciously, and there are enough empirical evidence in literature to support that behavior.
Okay. Let's come to the second part of your core argument. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Now, the second part of the argument is basically regarding to the income tax data. Interestingly, the income tax population data of the taxpayers, which today I think as on 31st December, it was at 8.2 million. We believe this number could go up by around 30 to 40 lakhs. So it could be closer to around 8.7 million by 31st March 2024, because there's also a lot of people who play with taxes, with fine, pay the taxes with fine. Now, if you look into this income tax data, here again, there is an interesting thing happening. Couple of findings are important. For example, we find out that a significant percentage of the population, I think around more than 35% of the taxpayers who are below the 3.5 lakh have moved up into upper income bucket. 19.5% of the smaller farms, smallest farms, these are micro farms, have actually moved into the higher end of the becoming larger farms. In fact, an RBI report on currency and finance also substantiates this fact by saying that small farms are getting bigger, and they are getting integrated into the value chain because of the activities like PLI, and also because of the export push which the government is giving on the manufacturing sector. This apart, the average, the weighted income, I think here also an interesting proposition is that the government of India, the income tax, has published the average income. But I think the average income doesn't give you the complete picture. What we have found it out is the weighted income, where the weights basically are the midpoint of the income buckets. So if you use the midpoints of the income buckets and find out the weighted average income across all income classes, that has seen a 3 to 4 times jump in the last 10 years. I think that's another achievement. Other important thing is that in terms of the income inequality, even also how we measure an income inequality is the Gini coefficient. The Gini coefficient measure is actually declining from around 0.46 to 0.40. And the important point is that there are two distributions which we have plotted in the graph in one of the slides, which shows that in FY14, how was the distribution looking like, which basically means that what is the percentage of income share for each of the tax buckets in that population, and how is the income share of those people now 10 years back in the income tax bucket. You will be surprised to find out earlier the distribution was left heavy, meaning that basically a large part of the people were having not proportionate income classes in that category. Today, what we are seeing that the distribution is more of a normal shape, meaning that the share of the income in those population group of those people in the tax bucket is actually moving out faster than what the population group shows. In fact, the incremental growth in population and the incremental growth in income for each of these classes are actually at 1. So this is the final. The final is that we have also shown that the top 2.5% of the taxpayers today who are having income of more than 10 crores, their share was 2.81%. That has come down to 2.28%. So the income share of the large people are actually getting declining, and the income share of those people in the total segment of the population, which is always a measure of the inequality share, is actually showing a proportionate increase. We have traveled a lot of distance. Maybe we have to travel more, but we cannot deny the fact that there is a significant bulge at the middle income group of the Indian society.
And if there is a significant bulge in the middle income group, is that bulge on account of greater number of jobs or more formalization of existing jobs as well as business income?
I think it's a very interesting point, Siddharth. I could say it's a combination of all the factors. It's difficult to say which is outstripping the other, but there has been a significant formalization initiatives from the part of the government. In terms of the jobs, I think the Indian labor market, if you look into this, there's also a lot of debate about the Indian labor market, but defining characteristics of the Indian labor market is that it has been always the case that more than 50% of the people are self-employed. So this number has also gone up in recent times. We find that this is possibly a reflect of the entrepreneurship initiatives that the government of India actually has unleashed across several categories, because most of the self-employed people are coming from the unorganized sector. So that is one aspect. And the final point is that I think formalization and efforts, and the final point is the income of the people are also going up. The government is trying to support them in terms of and build up our social infrastructure at the bottom of the pyramid. And possibly, if the income tax structure gets further simplified, we could see a further boom at the middle of the income bulge, which is always good for a country like us, because that actually provides a backbone for any economic prosperity and development.
Dr. Ghosh, one of the points in your paper is about mean income now at 11.6 lakh versus 3.1 lakh in the period of fiscal 14 to fiscal 21. Can you expand on that? What does this imply? Because this is almost a 4x expansion.
Exactly. See, Siddharth, what we have done is that the income tax website actually gives you the average income across all income classes. For example, the number of taxpayers in each tax bucket and the total taxable income over there. So it divides that and find out the number. You can say that for the government, this number was actually higher in the initial years, and then our weighted mean income actually surpassed this government income in the later years. Exactly what we have done is that, see, the average statistics, average actually by a proverb which hides more than it reveals, because there is also extreme numbers, other things. So what we best thought was that we should look into the weighted mean income. Why we looked into the weighted mean income? Because while the averages show actually a growth across all classes, the weighted mean income shows how the contribution of the upper income tax category, middle income tax category, lower income tax category is playing out over there. So therefore, we calculated the weighted mean income. In this case, the weights are actually taken as the midpoint of each individual tax bucket. So if you use that midpoint as the individual tax bucket and the number of taxpayers over there, then this weighted mean income, you will see that initially it was lower than the government. Slowly, it has started to increase. I think from the assessment year 16, it has surpassed that. And then finally, today, the gap between the two is so huge. So it basically shows that it is always better to go by a weighted mean income than an average mean income, because an average number will hide more things than it reveals. And this is basically a significant jump. We have also made projections for AY23, but I am not putting out over there. The important point to note is that there is an almost 4-time jumps in this income, average weighted mean income, which we have computed across all income tax buckets over a period of 10 years.
And that perhaps reflects into consumption of various categories. One more point, and this is on business growth. You also said that nearly 20%, 19.5 to be precise, of micro firms have increased income. and nearly 5% have transitioned to becoming small enterprises. Over 6% have become medium-sized, and over 9% have become large companies. Explain this.
Yes. See, what is happening is that I think the government of India actually changed the definition of the MSME sector in terms of the service and other criteria. And this is actually an interesting fact is that what is happening is that there has been no study on the total MSME sector in India. In 2016, there was a study which says that 6.2 crores, 6.3 crores was the study of the number of the MSME units in India. Now, recently, what the government, now here is the interesting observation. I will also put in out one more observation over here. The government of India is currently have an Uddam portal. On the Uddam portal, the total number of MSME units in the India is getting registered. As of today, if you look into the GSTN portal, the total number of taxpayers is 1.40. The total number of small enterprises which are registered on the Uddam portal have already crossed 3 crores. This means that a large part of these MSME units are micro. And I think this number could be as high as 99% or so. So because basically the MSME units in India, more of them are in the micro category. Now, what is happening is that a large part of these small enterprises who are having a turnover of less than 5 crores are actually migrating to the upper MSME echelons. And we find that this number is 19.5% as per the tax returns. And this is an interesting observation because even in our bank and even in the RBI data which we have given out, it shows that the total number of MSME units per capita loan is actually increased in the last 3 to 4 years. This is perhaps reflecting that the MSME units are getting integrated into the value chain. They are moving up the ladder, and possibly as we get our focus more and more on the manufacturing exports part, I think these MSME units will stand to gain large time because their contribution to exports is significantly larger. So this is one of the important point, and we are actually moving up from the low-end manufacturing to push our manufacturing share in GDP also. So I think this is the entire story which is playing out with the MSME units. It takes time for all this structural transformation, but believe me, once this starts to play out, I think these are all good for the economy in the long term.
Absolutely. The economy is a vehicle which has great mass, and once it picks up, slowing it down becomes difficult. I have two more data points to discuss before I come to a question or two on the broader points. And this is again quite interesting. India's economy explained via iPhones and also through food ordered on online platforms. Explain, how do iPhones come into this mix?
See, I think, yes, I think we have also worked on other parameters to say that the evidence of Kshaped recovery to far-fetched. One of them is two-wheeler sales, one of them is the gold loans. Other things we are not getting into that. If you have time, I can get into the two-wheeler part because that is always the most commonly cited.
No, the reason I asked you particularly iPhones is that the joke, and this is just a joke, that you perhaps need to sell a body organ to purchase an iPhone for many people. So how does that reflect economy?
No, I think at the end of the day, keeping that argument aside, I think a share of the iPhone market is to such a large extent, and I think I've also given the mass market share over there.
Yes.
A larger part of the iPhone actually also talks about the growing prosperity of the Indian middle class and also the growing aspirations. So there is nothing wrong in saying that this share of the iPhone market has moved up from 1 to 6% in the last 3 years, and in the Android phone also that has been the case. So this is one thing. And the second question which you asked just now, what was the other question?
No, again, 20 million semi-urban families using a food platform like Zomato.
Yes. See, this is also an interesting observation. Basically, the Zomato data does not give out the total number of breakup in semi-urban, urban, and metro areas. We are assuming that Zomato doesn't operate in rural areas because that is also another criticism that Zomato, how can we infer Zomato, which is basically an urban-centric platform. So what we did is that we found out the total number of active users from the Zomato data. Now, we also have the UPI breakdown in metro, urban, semi-urban areas. We have a fair share that how the UPI is actually undergoing in metro, urban, semi-urban. Now, anybody having an Zomato app should always be paid through an UPI app or something like that. So if you take that share of metro, urban, semi-urban share of the UPI and juxtapose on the Zomato active users, you will get the total number of Zomato active family members from the semi-urban side, the number which comes around 20 million. So the only point which we are trying to say is that if that is the number of people who are ordering food purely from semi-urban areas, does it mean that the country is actually at a stress? This is a simple question we have posed for the readers, and this only goes on to show that the popularity of the not only of the platform which you're talking about, but the popularity of people actually ordering food on case-to-case basis. And remember, the per capita size of all this is actually around 406 rupees as per the Zomato. So anybody, active users, 20 million active users from the semi-urban areas ordering food on a constant basis, does it signify that there is as a lot of index also comes out, like the hunger index, that Indian people are relatively hungry and not enjoy? So that was also a simple question which he plugged in to show that maybe, I mean, this is difficult to, it is wrong to say that, I mean, there is problem with hunger, there is problem with Kshaped recovery and many other things.
Okay, this is quite interesting. Around $5 of average order size, assuming average exchange rate. But if you were to put metro and urban together, 2,720 crore from the chart that was playing up on your screen, viewers. And if you were to do urban and semi-urban together, 2,400 crores. So that's very decent numbers, and this is just one platform. For a moment, let's also bring up the Zomato share and see how it has performed. Let's try and play that out on a window over the recent past, if we can bring that up, because what I want to do now is also come into the broader question, somewhere where we started our conversation from, Dr. Ghosh. And by the way, viewers, take a look at Zomato, up nearly, as you can see, nearly 14% in a month. And if you were to go back in time, and if we can bring that up also, you will see a continuous uptick in that stock. But this is not a stock show, so we'll leave that for some other time. Dr. Ghosh, I recently had occasion to talk to several economists about the shape of India's recovery. And the distinct impression that I had was that there is somehow also an ideological element to the discussion around it. There are certain people who vehemently believe that it is a K-shaped recovery. There are certain people who say it is not overall K-shaped, it may be K-shaped in certain sectors. Coming back to your major point, you said it is not a K-shaped recovery. Therefore, what kind of shape is India's post-COVID recovery?
See, I don't go by any alphabets like that one. I think if anybody wants to take it, I mean, I do also, people have talked about V-shape, people have talked about K-shape, but I think that at the end of the day, definitely K means basically, if you look into the word alphabet, K basically means if you look at the two stands, one of the stand is moving upward almost at 90 degrees, the other is declined by 90 degrees. So I think based on all the evidences I substantiated, I don't see that as a fair bit of the alphabetical description of the economy. And this was a coin I have written in the report, which was coined by Peter Atware of the university in UK. And he may be also very surprised today that his term has driven so much interest in a country like India. So this is one thing. Another thing which, Siddharth, I will tell you, I think one of the points which also other economists have pointed out in terms of distress is the migration in the savings. Because overall household savings, there's a lot of people who have moved into physical savings from financial savings, and that has dipped. That was again told as a distress. But remarkably, globally, this has been the trend. Globally, there has been a shift from financial assets to physical assets because people have actually got into mortgage. And if you look into the RBI report of 23, the reverse migration have also started to happen now. People moving from physical to financial, even that the financial markets are doing very well. So I think all these are part of some analysis which people actually need to do, and complete analysis. I we have done in our report is that we have just given out the data, we have given out the arguments, we have even said that record two-wheeler sales happened in a year where the rainfall deficiency was 14%. This is all data available in public domain. So my only point to all people, I can see a lot of discussion also in the public domain, a lot of edits coming out, but I would passionately appeal to all of them to look into the data and do a data-based analysis, because at the end of the day, anecdotal evidences are fine, but if you don't support it with data, I think somehow the research question doesn't get answered at any point of time. Of course, if there is growth, there will be some amount of inequality. But it is fair to say that everything is unequal. Whatever is been happening is actually K. Nothing has happened. I think it's difficult to say, because if you are supporting food infrastructure to 80 crore people, is actually some sort of a social infrastructure which you are doing, and it is bound to do good for those people at the bottom of the pyramid and some point of time. You cannot deny that.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, forget everything else, and you'll agree with me, Soumya Ghosh, that if it is able to prevent basic hunger,
yes,
that by itself is more than many other objectives achieved. I want to ask you in anecdotal bit. I don't know whether you have had time to look into it. What does the real estate sector in India tell you in terms of the relevance to the economic recovery? Because real estate is a barometer of many sorts. It's also by itself a consumption sector. We see premium housing being sold every day. But you also don't see ads for affordable houses. And this always puzzles me, that what does this mean? 5 crore plus houses even in the suburbs of sprawling NCR like Delhi. What does this tell us?
No, I think it's also a fair question, Siddharth, and I think you have said the correct thing. Yes, we have also said that at some point of time there was a decline in affordable housing, because I think one of the reasons for this housing boom is basically also the low interest rate. If you actually look into the interest rates during the pandemic, you will see that the real estate sector had started to recover during that, and all sections were doing quite well. But however, after this increase in the RBI to fight, after this increase in the monetary policy to fight off the inflation, I think there has been some slowdown in the affordable segment. That's true. But the real estate sector in overall has continued to do well, and this should be a pivot of recovery in the coming days. Maybe one thing which I would like to happen is that this housing scheme which the government of India is doing, Prime Minister Awas Yojana, or the affordable housing, maybe if some sort of more initiative is done in that direction, I think that will be great for all of us in terms of all the sectors like steel and cement, which currently are doing quite well. So yes, I agree with your point on that point, that there has been some decline in the affordable segment because there has been an increase in the interest rates. Hopefully, I think over the inflation subsiding down and interest rates actually mean reverting, this sector will bounce back again. But overall, more initiatives could be needed for the real estate sector. Specifically, I think in a lot of states, the radar, some of the states, the radar rule may have to be overhauled. That is one of my contention.
Absolutely, and hopefully this government will look at that. One final point, I say this because we wanted a counter view after this discussion with you, but we had trouble finding someone who was going to come out. What do you think is feeding into the counter narrative, which seems to insist on a particular alphabet to describe India's economic recovery post-COVID? Is this being driven by ideology, or is it being driven by some other textbooks such people might have read?
I think at the end of the day, we are all students of economics. I am also a trained economist. So I actually, whatever data comes in public domain, we analyze that. And if you remember, Siddharth, last time I was also on your show when the income tax data was first published. After that, the data published has now been more rich in variety. I should request everybody to look into this data carefully, do an analysis, and I think the results, the people can actually find out a lot of important findings from the results. It's not that all results which we get, the people have to believe with all the results, but if you don't believe, come up with a narrative which is based on data-based evidence. It's at the end of the day, if the debate boils down from database to anecdotal evidence as we see today, I think that doesn't serve any purpose. Any number you show us, I think, of course, there could be, as I said to you in the beginning, that there is a huge theory of growth. If growth comes, there could be some sort of inequality. So therefore, that was the theory of trickle-down theory, which we had in the earlier era of 60s and 70s, which did not happen that. So there are several debates on that. But my question is that until and unless you have not done enough work or looked into the data more passionately, it is not proper to pronounce your verdict on an alpha-based recovery, which India has done post I think, pandemic. And I also believe that this resilience of the Indian economy has taken everybody as surprise. All of us were projecting a GDP deceleration of more than 10%. This final number is now at 5.8. And this could be revised down even further in the estimates, which will come out in May. So from over 10% to below 5% contraction shows that the resilience of the sector was much more than even whatever people believed on the streets or made us to believe.
Absolutely. And Dr. Ghosh, as I thank you, I just want to add that this is not a case of show me the argument and I'll show you the data. This is data that is out there and can be verified, double-checked, cross-checked. But as the SBI Group Chief Economic Advisor has said, that it is not a K-shaped recovery. He doesn't believe in ascribing an alphabet to describe India's recovery, but he definitely used the word resilience. And I would like to end the show by saying, if nothing else, it is definitely a R-shaped recovery where the resilience is the key factor that determines how India's economy has been performing and hopefully will continue to perform and be one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Dr. Soumya, Kanti, Ghosh, thank you very much for your time with us. With that, it's a wrap on today's episode of Easynomics. I'll be back with more. Until then, goodbye.
Welcome to Business Today Television. I'm Karishma and joining me is the CEO of CAPA India, Kapil Kaul. Kapil, thank you so much for being on this conversation with us on the India Today Network.
Thank you, Karishma.
Kapil, I'm going to start off by asking, what is CAPA India's envisions for 2024 for the Indian aviation sector?
Well, I think we'll continue to see robust growth for 24, both for domestic and international. The growth is actually going to be much higher